That sun that morning, it didn't just rise, it ignited the water, scattering diamonds across the surface of Heron Lake. And my neighbors, well, they were lined up on the manicured lawns, clutching their artisanal coffees just frozen, staring at the impossible sight before them, a solid 6-foot cedar fence, brand new, slicing straight through the middle of what used to be our perfect shared lakefront access, cutting across the sand, through the grass, and actually severing the community dock in half like a bizarre magic trick gone wrong. On one side, a pale yellow luxury chaise lounge sat trapped, beside a brand-new sea-doo ramp that now led straight into a wooden barrier, and standing there, mouth agape, was Penelope Cross, my HOA president's favorite cousin, her whole private resort caged. On my side, I just calmly tightened the last bolt, wiped the sweat from my brow, and offered the stunned crowd, including my former HOA president, Clara Jennings, still in her silk bathrobe, a polite, slightly mischievous wave. But to really get here, to this moment of pure, unadulterated property line justice, you have to rewind about 4 years. I'm David, and I bought my place in Oak Haven Shores, not just for the house, but for that singular promise: deeded waterfront rights. It was all in the paperwork: legal access to a wide, sandy beach, a fishing spot my kids adored, a place to grill and watch those unbelievable sunsets melt into the water. Every penny of that lakefront premium felt worth it. Everything changed 6 months ago when Clara Jennings took the reins of our homeowners association. If you've ever met that one person who mistakes a tiny shred of authority for a mandate from God, that was Clara. Within weeks, she was fining people for letting their petunias bloom in the wrong shade of red, banning backyard fire pits because of the ambient smoke aesthetics, and generally making everyone's life miserable. But her true masterpiece, her Mona Lisa of manipulation, was her family. Her retired brother was suddenly our architectural review consultant with a cushy salary, and when her cousin, Penelope, flew in from Boca Raton for an extended stay, Clara decided that HOA bylaws were merely suggestions she could rewrite on a whim. The first sign of the coming storm was a Tuesday morning about 2 months ago. I stepped out, coffee in hand, and saw Penelope staking her claim. And I don't mean with a beach towel. I mean with construction. Workers were installing an absurdly oversized sea-doo ramp, high-end tiki torches, and a massive custom-built sound system. It completely blocked the natural sight lines, took up nearly 3/4 of the shared access point, and frankly ruined the view I paid a fortune for. I walked over, polite, trying to be the bigger person. "Hi, I'm David, your neighbor," I said, offering my hand. Penelope just looked me up and down like I was a particularly persistent gnat. In a tone as clipped and cold as a winter snap, she informed me that Clara had reassigned this portion of the lakefront for her exclusive use during her visit. Apparently, my family was wasting the space by only using it on weekends, but she, with her daily yoga sessions and weekly outdoor Vintners Club gatherings, actually needed it. When I pointed out, calmly, that the waterfront was shared, deeded property, she simply waved a piece of paper in my face, a nasty little document called an exclusive temporary use easement. She smugly told me to take it up with the HOA, sweetie, if I had a problem. The paper was dated 3 days earlier and claimed the HOA board had voted unanimously to grant her this privilege. That was my first clue the lake smelled fishier than usual, since 2 of our board members were literally on a cruise in the Mediterranean that week. See, my day job is as a contracts lawyer. I've spent 20 years digging through the fine print of billion-dollar mergers, so this HOA nonsense was frankly insulting. I immediately contacted the county property records and the city planning office. Both confirmed what I already knew. Our waterfront rights were irrevocably deeded to individual properties. The HOA had zero authority over that land. Changing the deed would require signed consent from every single affected homeowner. Clara's little easement was legally worth less than the napkin I wiped my dog's paw with. When I presented this at the next HOA meeting, Clara's face went a truly magnificent shade of beet purple. She gripped the podium with white knuckles and shrieked that the HOA had recently amended its bylaws to include waterfront management, and anyone interfering would be hit with a $500 daily fine. Then on cue, she whipped out yet another shady piece of paperwork. Claiming this bylaw change had been approved at a special emergency session, no one else on the board could recall attending. Meanwhile, Penelope had turned our once tranquil space into a nonstop spring break. The music blasted from dawn until midnight. Her guests treated the sand like a giant outdoor trash can. And that hideous jet ski ramp was an eyesore that, I later confirmed, broke 3 local environmental codes. But the final, soul-crushing straw came one morning when my 8-year-old daughter, Lily, went down for her usual dip. Penelope physically stood in her way, blocking her path, and told her, "Not anymore, sweetie. This is private property now." Lily came home with tears streaming down her face, trembling. That was it. That was the moment the lawyer in me switched off and the angry father switched on. I spent the next week buried in my documents. My original purchase agreement, the official property survey, the HOA charter, and 2 decades of meeting minutes. The truth was simple, powerful, and utterly beautiful. The lakefront access was permanently deeded to my lot, and the HOA charter specifically stated the board had 0 authority over deeded property rights. Any attempt to tamper with those rights would make the individual board members personally liable for damages. I drafted a formal legal notice, a certified letter of epic proportions, to both Clara and Penelope. They had 72 hours to remove all personal property and restore community access, or I would take them to court to protect my property rights, and I would pursue damages. Their reaction was as predictable as a summer squall. The next morning, Clara was at my front door with Penelope and some man in a wrinkled linen suit who looked like he learned law from a daytime court drama. They came at me from every angle. Threats, pathetic bribes, and desperate attempts to manipulate me. Clara flashed a strained, fake smile first. "David, let's be reasonable. We'll waive all your HOA dues for a full year. Just drop the issue." Penelope chimed in with her own ridiculous proposal. "Fine. Your family can use the lakefront every other Wednesday morning." "How about that?" "A timeshare!" And the pathetic lawyer kept mumbling vague terms like adverse possession and squatters' rights, clearly just trying to sound impressive. I actually had to bite my cheek to keep from bursting out laughing. I calmly declined their offers and gently showed them my own legal credentials. The transformation on their faces was priceless. Fake charm twisted into pure volcanic fury. Clara hissed that I would regret ever crossing a Jennings before they all stomped off in a righteous huff. The 72-hour deadline came and went. Nothing was moved. In fact, Penelope doubled down, dragging out more furniture and starting construction on what looked like a permanent, roofed shade structure. Fine. If they wanted to play hardball, I had the perfect solution. I immediately hired a licensed surveyor. Not just a guy with a tape measure, I wanted official, court-admissible documentation. The results were crystal clear. The lakefront access was deeded down the middle. Each homeowner had rights to their portion, and Penelope's sprawling monstrosity had clearly trampled over mine. Armed with the official plat map, I drove to the biggest lumber yard in the county. The young guy behind the counter looked at me like I was insane when I told him exactly how much cedar fencing I needed and where it was going. In a small community like Oak Haven Shores, word travels faster than a rogue jet ski. By the time I got home, my phone was blowing up with neighbors asking the same thing. "David, are you really putting a fence down the lakefront?" I gave them the simplest, most legally airtight answer. "I'm just marking my property line." The next morning, just as the sun was beginning to break, the same light I mentioned at the start, I was back at the lakefront with a professional fence crew. We had everything: city permits, survey stakes clearly marked, and enough fence panels to make Robert Frost weep with joy. The line was perfect, straight as an arrow, slicing across the sand, down the edge of the dock I jointly owned, all the way to the water's edge. Clean, legal, final. At 7 a.m., Penelope stumbled out of her house with a massive coffee mug, just in time to see the panels going up. The mug slipped from her hands and shattered on the decking. She let out a scream so primal the ducks on the far shore took flight. Within minutes, Clara arrived, still in her silk bathrobe and curlers, followed by half the neighborhood settling in for the best morning entertainment they'd had all year. The meltdown was truly spectacular. Clara shrieked every accusation she could conjure: vandalism, trespassing, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and something truly baffling about identity theft. She called the police. They showed up, checked my permits and survey, shrugged, and left. She called the city inspector. He confirmed the fence was perfectly within code. She called the mayor, her congressman, and I swear she might have tried the White House switchboard. Every call ended the same way, with her voice getting higher and more desperate. Penelope wasn't doing any better. Her precious jet ski ramp now sat half inaccessible behind the fence. Her custom multi-speaker sound system was cleanly bisected, one speaker now mocking her from my side of the line. And the half-built shade structure straddled the property line, rendering it completely useless because it was legally on both properties and unusable on either. Her construction crew quietly packed up their tools and drove off as she stood there, opening and closing her mouth like a beached carp. That evening, the emergency HOA meeting was packed. Clara had printed flyers calling me a neighborhood terrorist, claiming I was destroying property values and community harmony. She stood at the podium, voice trembling with performative rage, demanding the board fine me into bankruptcy and order the fence torn down. But that's when the tide turned. Thomas Albright, a retired circuit court judge who lived 3 doors down, stood up first. Calmly, clearly, he explained to the entire room that Clara's recent actions, the illegal documents, the threats, the misuse of power, had exposed the board itself to personal liability. Then came Dr. Sarah Chen, whose prize-winning rose garden had been bulldozed under one of Clara's beautification mandates, presenting her own meticulous legal findings against the board. One by one, 6 other homeowners followed, listing their grievances. By the time they were done, it was clear the Clara Jennings era was crumbling. The calls for her resignation started as murmurs, but quickly swelled into a unified, roaring chant. The final, decisive blow came when Penelope's husband flew in unexpectedly from out of state. He surveyed the mess. The fence, the trashed-up yard, Penelope sobbing dramatically in her oversized sun hat, and made a silent executive decision. Movers arrived the next morning. Neighbors overheard him telling Penelope that her cousin's ridiculous power trip had dragged their family into an expensive, humiliating disaster. Clara made one last desperate play at that final tense HOA meeting. She stood up and dramatically announced that as president, she was issuing an executive order to have the fence removed by force. That's when the board's official attorney, Mr. Harrison, who had been silently scribbling notes all evening, finally stood. His words were sharp, cutting like clean steel. "Ms. Jennings," he said without emotion, "you have no such authority. Your actions have already exposed this association to multiple legal vulnerabilities, and the board must act immediately to contain the fallout." The vote that followed was swift, unanimous. Clara Jennings was removed as HOA president on the spot. But that wasn't the end of her nightmare. The board also voted to pursue legal action against her for misuse of HOA funds. It turned out she'd dipped into the association's legal budget to pay for Penelope's bogus easement paperwork, and further accounting revealed she'd been steadily skimming from the landscaping budget to pad her brother's fake consulting contracts. 3 months later, Clara Jennings stood trembling in front of a judge. Tears were streaming down her face as the verdict was read, guilty of embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Her sentence, 2 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and restitution of $47,000 to the HOA. The judge's closing remarks were scathing, emphasizing that abusing community trust for personal gain was a serious offense that came with very real, very public consequences. As the gavel came down, Clara broke down completely. Her self-proclaimed reign as the neighborhood tyrant was over, not with a bang, but with the sound of her own downfall echoing through the silent courtroom. And me? I still have my fence. It stands there today, a perfectly legal cedar monument to property rights, good neighbors, and the sweet, sweet taste of knowing the law is always mightier than a bully. So let me ask you, have you ever dealt with a Clara or a Karen in your own life? Was I right to build that fence, or should I have just taken her to court from day one? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that like button if you appreciate a little neighborhood justice, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories about standing your ground.